Okay, so are you ready to dive back into the history books? Because this deep dive is all about, like, the start of World War One.
Oh, yeah.
And trust me, this isn't going to be some boring, like, lecture, you know?
Right.
Your notes on how this whole thing got going, how this global conflict got going, are packed with intrigue. Um, how did that even happen moments?
Yeah,
To rival any, like, best-selling thriller.
it's true. And what I think is so captivating about this era is how much it still resonates with us today. Like, you look at the forces that pushed Europe to the brink back then, and they're still shaping global politics in all these ways that I think a lot of people don't realize.
Yeah, for sure. And, your notes dive into term 4 history notes, and we're zeroing in on the long-term causes of World War One. But instead of doing like the typical dry textbook thing,
Yeah.
let's just picture this. Okay, imagine a pressure cooker
Mm-hmm.
slowly building with steam.
Good.
That's Europe in the early 1900s. And each cause is like, we're just cranking up the heat even more.
I like that analogy. You can just feel the tension mounting as we kind of examine each of these factors.
Right. So first up is nationalism. And your notes define this as, and let me quote this, citizens being proud of their country's achievements and willing to fight for them.
Right.
But, it feels like there's something deeper there.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about, I don't know, like loving your country because it made like the best products.
No, absolutely. Nationalism during this period, it was like this potent cocktail. You've got pride, you've got the shared identity, and often this sense of cultural superiority, like they're the best,
Yeah.
right? It's almost like belonging to a club,
Yeah.
and this club believes that it's destined for greatness,
Yeah.
and that can be intoxicating.
Yeah.
But it can also be really dangerous when those ambitions collide.
Yeah, that we're the best thing can really mess things up. And speaking of competition,
Right.
your notes also mention industrial economies as like a major pressure point.
Right.
Britain was like the OG, the original industrial powerhouse, but Germany was, they were quickly becoming a force to be reckoned with.
Oh, yeah.
That kind of rivalry. That had to create some serious friction.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Imagine it like this. Britain's the star athlete, right?
Yeah.
They've been at the top of their game for decades. And then here comes Germany, bigger, stronger, hungry to prove itself. That's economic anxiety. That's a struggle for dominance waiting to happen.
Yeah, like the classic new kid on the block trying to shake things up. And when it came to flexing their muscles, nothing quite said we mean business, like the battle for control of the seas.
Yeah.
Your notes mention the Dreadnought, Britain's like state-of-the-art warship that basically sent shockwaves across the world. So, expert, like why was this particular ship such a game changer?
I think it's important to look at the Dreadnought as more than just a technological marvel. It was also a message, this loud and expensive message.
Yeah.
It's like, imagine you've got these two rival tech giants. They're desperately trying to outdo each other with the latest, the most powerful gadget.
Yeah.
But it's less about the product,
Right.
and it's more about the message it sends.
I see.
And Britain's message was very clear. We will maintain our naval supremacy, no matter the cost.
Wow. Talk about a high-stakes game of one-upmanship. And this competitive spirit, it wasn't limited to just Europe's coastlines.
Right.
This rivalry, it kind of spilled over into a very different kind of competition, the race for colonies.
Yes.
Your notes point out that countries were, quote, competing for these overseas territories.
Yeah.
It almost feels like a historical echo of globalization and all of its, complexities.
It really is. You can't separate the scramble for colonies from this, I guess this hunger for resources, influence, and of course markets for their goods. These European powers were essentially vying for pieces on a global chessboard. And the stakes were incredibly high. They weren't just securing land, right?
Yeah.
It was wealth, it was power, strategic advantage, all of it.
Yeah. So we've got this like potent mix brewing, right? Nationalism, economic rivalry, global competition for colonies.
Yeah.
It's like Europe's tinderbox, just waiting for a spark. And that's where your notes take us next. The Balkans. Expert, this region, it was notorious for, like, its volatility back then. What made it such a powder keg?
It's like this. You've got this crossroads, right? Right. Empires collide, each one with their own ambitions, their own, ancient grudges.
Yeah.
And the Balkans were like this melting pot.
Yeah.
Cultures, ethnicities, a place where the Ottoman Empire's grip was weakening.
Yep.
And these smaller nations, they're vying for independence. But the larger powers, like Austria-Hungary, they saw this as a threat, like things could unravel. It was just a recipe for instability.
Yeah. In your notes, they describe the Ottoman Empire as collapsing like a house of cards. leaving behind this void that, well, it seemed like everyone was eager to fill. Serbia makes a bold move, declares independence, but Austria-Hungary, well, they weren't exactly thrilled about it.
No, not at all. Austria-Hungary, they saw Serbia's independence as a dangerous precedent. Remember, their empire was this patchwork of different ethnic groups.
Yeah.
And Serbia's success, well, it could inspire others to break away, right?
Yeah.
They'd crush that. Any hope of a domino effect.
So they weren't just going to let Serbia just, like, go quietly. And that brings us to the event that lights the fuse, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Your notes mention that he wasn't exactly, the most popular guy.
Right.
Why was he disliked? And why did it matter?
I think for many, Franz Ferdinand was a symbol of an outdated and oppressive system. He represented an empire struggling to hold on to its power.
Yeah.
And let's just say his policies. They didn't exactly win him any popularity contests. Even within Austria-Hungary, there were those who saw his assassination as a chance to consolidate power, tighten their grip.
Wow. Talk about a pressure cooker moment. So we've got the stage set, tensions are high. Let's break down the assassination itself. Your notes provide some incredible details, starting with the Archduke's trip to Sarajevo. Expert. What made this city such a hotbed of anti-Austrian sentiment?
Sarajevo was brimming with tension. It had this large Slavic population with strong ties to Serbia.
Okay.
And they had recently been annexed by Austria-Hungary, which, created resentment, fueled nationalist fervor. Choosing Sarajevo for the Archduke's visit, I mean, you could call it a Gray's miscalculation, or maybe even a deliberate provocation.
Either way, not a good move, not in hindsight. And then, of course, there's Gavrilo Princip, the assassin. Your notes mention he was part of the Black Hand. Who were they?
Right. So the Black Hand, they were a secret Serbian nationalist group, and they were willing to use violence to achieve their goal. A unified South Slav state, under Serbian rule, of course. They saw Austria-Hungary as a foreign oppressor. And they believed they were fighting for their people's freedom, which, it reminds us that one person's terrorist is another's freedom fighter.
Right.
And history. Well, history is often written by the victors.
It is a very sobering thought. The assassination itself, it plays out like something from a spy thriller. You've got the first attempt, the bomb, it goes wrong. And then this almost unbelievable twist of fate puts Princip in the perfect position for that second fatal shot. Makes you wonder how history might have unfolded if any tiny detail had been different.
Right. It really shows how these seemingly insignificant events can have world-altering consequences. One wrong turn, a moment's hesitation. The course of history could have been completely different. But in that charged atmosphere of 1914, the assassination acted as a catalyst. It ignited the powder keg that had been, precariously balanced for years.
I mean, it's wild to think that this one event, as tragic as it was, could have such far-reaching consequences. And it seems like Austria-Hungary, they saw this as more than just a tragedy, you know what I mean?
Right.
Your notes use a very specific word here. Opportunity. They called it an opportunity. Wait a minute. An opportunity? Were they really looking for an excuse to go to war?
I think you've hit on a really crucial point. While the assassination was horrific, Austria-Hungary definitely seized upon it to achieve their own objectives. It wasn't just about revenge. This was about crushing Serbian independence and sending a message to any other groups within their empire who might be considering, a similar path. They wanted to reassert their dominance, and they saw this as their chance.
So they had a plan, ready to go.
Yeah.
Just waiting for the right moment, and then things just escalate so fast, like dominoes, one after the other. Your notes lay it all out. Russia backs Serbia. France throws their hat in the ring because of their, quote, military alliance with Russia. And then Germany. Germany makes that fateful promise to Austria. So let's unpack this whole chain reaction. Expert, Russia. They felt obligated to defend Serbia. But why?
Alliances were everything in this period. And Russia saw itself as the protector of the Slavic nations.
Okay.
And Serbia. They were a key ally in the Balkans. For Russia to back down, that made them look weak. And not just to, their rivals, but to their own people, too.
Yes.
And nationalism, well, as we talked about earlier, that can be a powerful motivator.
For sure. It's like that old saying, you come at the king, you best not miss.
Right, exactly.
Backing down wasn't really an option at that point for Russia, so they mobilize, and that's when France gets involved. The notes mention this military alliance, but what did that actually look like in action? Was this a true, you fight, we fight situation?
Essentially, yes. These weren't just casual agreements or anything. They were binding treaties with, very serious military obligations. France and Russia, they had each other's backs if either one of them were attacked. So when Russia mobilized to support Serbia, it set off that chain reaction. Germany saw this as a direct threat, obviously, and they had a choice to make.
And they chose to back Austria-Hungary, no matter what. Your notes point that out very clearly. But how did this, what seems like a small promise, how did that turn into a commitment that basically started World War I?
Because they essentially gave Austria-Hungary a blank check, with Germany, the strongest military power in Europe, behind them. Austria-Hungary felt emboldened to take a hard line with Serbia. They issued this ultimatum with these deliberately unacceptable terms, knowing it would likely lead to war. And tragically,
It did. It's almost impossible to grasp how this, like, seemingly isolated incident in this relatively small city could spiral into this global conflict with such devastating consequences. But your notes really highlight that history. It's not just about, memorizing dates and names.
Right.
It's about understanding this, like
No.
this complex web of choices and alliances and ideologies that drive events on a
Right.
global scale.
yeah, and while we've, only just scratched the surface here of this very complex period, I think this deep dive has given us all a much deeper understanding
Yeah.
of the events that led to World War I. And I think it's also a stark reminder that the seeds of conflict are often sown long before the first shots are fired.
Absolutely. And I think, it makes you wonder what else was happening, like beyond Europe's borders, that might have contributed to this powder keg atmosphere. Our notes focus on Europe, but the world was already incredibly interconnected back then. It's fascinating to consider how events on one continent could influence events, halfway across the globe.
Yeah, absolutely. History is very rarely confined by geographical borders, and the world in the early 20th century was a tangled web of relationships and rivalries and reactions. This deep dive, focused on a specific region, but hopefully gave us all a glimpse into this interconnected world. And it's up to all of us, as listeners, to continue exploring those connections and their lasting impact.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive, but don't worry, we'll be back soon with another fascinating look at history from Term 4 History Notes. Until then, stay curious.